The new 2017 iPad is finally here, so we got to see a pretty major, so to say, iPad update just today. So Apple has quietly updated the Apple Store, and they've done quite a few interesting things. So they've announced a new iPhone, a red iPhone 7, some Apple Watch updates as well, a new app for the iPhone and the iPad called Clips, and I've talked about every single iPad update, iPhone update, and everything they've done in this video, which I've done a couple of hours ago in case you've missed it. But in this video, I'm only going to talk about this new 2017 iPad. So this is a pretty interesting product because what Apple has done is that they've actually removed the iPad Air 1 and also the iPad Air 2 from the Apple online store. So the iPad Air, so to say, is now dead, at least for now. And this is the replacement, and it's actually called just the iPad. Yes, the name is quite weird. The new iPad is simply called the iPad. And this new iPad comes with the Apple A9 processor, so it's faster than the iPad Air 2, and it's also really cheap. So this is actually the cheapest iPad that Apple is selling right now, even cheaper kinda than the iPad Air, than the iPad Mini 4. So a faster version of the iPad Air 2 and a cheaper version of the iPad Air 2, it sounds amazing. It sounds like the best deal ever, but unfortunately it's not. There's so many catches in this thing. There's so many things that Apple hasn't told you about. So hey everyone, welcome to the ZONEofTECH. I'm Daniel, and in this episode of things you need to know before buying a product, I'll be covering not 5, not 10, but actually 15 things you didn't know or things that you need to know before buying the new 2017 iPad. So yeah, enjoy. So number one of the biggest downsides of this new iPad is that it doesn't have the iPad Air 2 design. Instead, it has the iPad Air 1 design. So this basically means that it's actually thicker than the previous iPad Air 2. So it comes in at 7.5mm thick versus 6.1 that we have on the iPad Pro 9.7 inch, the iPad Air 2, and the iPad Mini 4. So yeah, this is a pretty thick device by the current generation iPad standards. And speaking of this new iPad Air 1 design, it also seems, at least from the Apple page, that the bezels are exactly the same size as on the iPad Air 1 as well. So basically this new 2017 iPad has the same design, the exact same design as the 2013 iPad Air 1. Then number 2, this new iPad is not just thicker than the iPad Air 2, but it's also heavier. So it's 478 grams versus 444 grams that the iPad Pro 9.7 inch or the iPad Air 2 were. And by the way, it seems that it's actually heavier than even the iPad Air 1, which was 469 grams. So yeah, this is the heaviest of all iPads since the iPad 4. Obviously 34 grams is not going to make a huge difference when traveling, when carrying this thing, but still, it's still something to keep in mind. Number 3, this is a pretty big one. So the new iPad doesn't have a laminated display, unlike the iPad Air 2 and pretty much all Apple devices. So all Apple devices that you can buy right now, all of them have a laminated display. And having a laminated display simply makes a huge difference when viewing content. So basically a laminated display, what it means is that the touch input, so the touch panel, the digitizer, the glass on the display, and also the LCD are basically laminated, so merged into just one sheet of glass instead of having separate glasses, separate panels. Just take a look at this video I done a while ago on the iPad Mini 2 versus the iPad Air 2. The iPad Mini 2 didn't have a laminated display and the colors were so washed out. And yeah, on the iPad Air 2, when you touch it, you actually feel as if you're actually touching the display because the gap between the display and the actual glass is almost nothing. Then number 4, this is not a DCI-P3 display. So a DCI-P3 display is something like we have on the 5K Retina iMac, the new iPhone 7s, and also the new iPad Pro 9.7 inch. So it doesn't support that wider color gamut. So in the end, the colors of the display are going to be much more washed out than on something like even the iPad Pro, even the iPad Air 2 that we had in 2014. So this is basically a 2013 display on a 2017 device. Then number 5, since this is not an iPad Pro, it also doesn't have a smart connector. So what this means is that you won't be able to use a smart keyboard like you can, the smart Apple keyboard like you can on the iPad Pros. And also this iPad doesn't support the Apple Pencil either. So if you want to buy the Apple Pencil later, you won't be able to use it on this iPad, only on the iPad Pros. Then if you care about the sound, if you care about sound quality and speakers, well, the speakers on the iPad Air 1 were decent, they weren't great. On the iPad Air 2, we got some better speakers, and then on the iPad Pro 9.7 inch and on the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, we actually got 4 speakers, so 2 speakers on each side for a total of obviously 4 speakers, 4 stereo speakers. So the sound quality on the iPad Pros is just insane. The sound quality on the iPad Air 2 is pretty good, and the sound quality on the iPad Air 1 was decent. And this thing only comes with 2 speakers, and I have a feeling that these are the same speakers as in the iPad Air 1, so don't expect any amazing sound quality coming from this iPad. Number 7, this is a pretty interesting one. There's no anti-reflective coating on this iPad at all. So this is something we've had on so many iPads and on so many Apple devices. I do remember the iPad Air 1 and the iPad Mini 2 to be really, really reflective because they were laminated. And I think this is the case, this is the exact case with this iPad as well. Since the display is not laminated, the reflection is automatically higher, and then it doesn't have an anti-reflective coating. So yeah, another thing to keep in mind when it comes to the new 2017 iPad. Then number 8, this new iPad comes with the Apple A9 processor. So the Apple A9 processor is the same processor that you have in the iPhone 6s. And in the iPad Pro 12.9 inch and the iPad Pro 9.7 inch, you have the Apple A9X processor, which is quite a bit better, GPU-wise at least, than the Apple A9. So Apple says that the Apple A9 is 1.6 times faster than the Apple A8 CPU-wise, and 1.8 times faster GPU-wise. The Apple A9X, however, is 1.9 times faster CPU-wise, and 2.7 times faster GPU-wise. That's at least on the 9.7 inches iPad Pro. So this is another thing to keep in mind. The performance is going to be good. It's not going to be amazing because, well, on the iPhone 6s, how does the iPhone 6s perform on iOS 10? It's pretty good. It's obviously not up to the iPhone 7, but it's pretty decent. It's not bad. But then also keep in mind that this new iPad also comes with a much higher resolution display than the iPhone 6s. So it's actually going to run slower than the iPhone 6s. This is basically the same thing with the iPad Mini and the iPad Air 2. On the iPad Mini, you only have an Apple A8 processor, the same processor that's inside the iPhone 6. And the iPad Mini, I have to say, the iPad Mini on iOS 10 at least, it's pretty laggy. It's pretty laggy just because you have the same processor as in the iPhone 6, but you have a much higher resolution display to drive. Now moving on to the cameras on this new iPad is basically the exact same camera that we got on the iPad Air 2. So basically the iPad Air 2 had the same camera as in the iPhone 5s. So this is an iPhone 5s camera, so a 2013 camera in a 2017 device. But then again, this is an iPad, not a phone, so I think it's pretty okay. So that means an 8 megapixel sensor compared to 12 megapixels like we have on the 9.7 inch iPad Pro. And this is also an f2.4 aperture, so a bit smaller than the f2.2 that we have on the 9.7 inch iPad Pro. And also the flash is missing, so unfortunately no flash on this iPad, and also no live photos at all. Speaking of things that are missing, there's no 4K video recording on this iPad at all. So if you care about 4K videos, watching 4K videos, and especially shooting 4K videos on your iPad, you won't be able to at least shoot them on the new iPad. You can only shoot 1080p up to 30 frames per second, and 720p up to 128. So this is significantly lower than the 1080p 60 that you have on the iPhone 7, the iPhone 6s, for example, and even the iPhone 6, and 720p at 240. So again, if you care about slow motion and that really fluid 60 frames per second 1080p, then the new iPad doesn't have that. Number 11, in terms of the front-facing camera, there's a few things that I want to mention. So this is a 1.2 megapixel sensor. Yeah, a 1 megapixel front-facing camera. When was the last time you actually used such a thing? Now, leaving the jokes aside, this is basically the same camera as on the iPad Air 2, so the quality will be identical to the iPad Air 2. On the 9.7 inches iPad Pro, we have a 5 megapixel camera, and then on the iPhone 7, we have a 7 megapixel front-facing camera. So again, if you care about selfies, and also if you care about FaceTiming, because I'm guessing that if you have an iPad, you will probably use FaceTime a lot. So a 1.2 megapixel camera unfortunately isn't the best. Oh, and also if you care about that Retina flash, about that front-facing camera flash, that's also missing from this iPad. We only have that on the 9.7 inches iPad Pro, so even on the 12.9 inches iPad Pro, that's also missing as well. Now the iPad Pro 9.7 inches also got a pretty unique feature that for some reason is only found on the iPad Pro 9.7 inch, and that's a True Tone display. So on the iPad Pro 9.7 inch, basically the display automatically adjusts its color temperature based on the outside conditions, so based on the lighting condition in your room. For some reason, Apple hasn't added that in the iPhone 7s. We'll most likely see it in the new iPads, in the new iPad Pros in 2017. But yeah, this iPad is missing a True Tone display as well. So if you care about that, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but if you really care about that, it's also missing from this new iPad. Now, if you care about traveling and if you care about the LTE version of this new iPad, I want to mention a few things as well. So the first one is that this new iPad doesn't come with an embedded Apple SIM. You can still add whatever SIM you want, but it doesn't come out of the box with an embedded Apple SIM like the 9.7 inch iPad Pro comes with. And a few things about the number of LTE bands. So this is pretty interesting. So we have 21 LTE bands on this new iPad. Then we have 23 bands on the iPad Pro 9.7 inch, and we actually have 20 bands on the iPad Pro 12.9 inch and the iPad Mini 4 and the iPad Air 2. So this is better than those iPads, but it's still a bit worse than the iPad Pro 9.7 inch. So overall, the iPad Pro 9.7 inch is the king at the moment of all iPads. And finally, number 15, let's talk about the price a bit. So this is cheap. This is the cheapest iPad that you can buy right now. So it basically starts at $329, and yeah, it's even cheaper than the iPad mini. However, the iPad mini, you can only buy the iPad mini in the 128 gigabytes. So the 32 gigabyte iPad mini 4 was now removed. You can only get it in 128. So the baseline option is cheaper than the iPad mini 4. However, the 128 gigabyte option is more expensive than the iPad mini 4. So $329 in the US, and for some reason, £340 in the UK. So it's really, really expensive in the UK. It's more than 1-to-1 the price in the US. So I have no idea why it's so expensive in the UK. It's obviously because of the inflation caused by Brexit, but yeah, still, Apple should have at least put the price onto a 1-to-1 ratio. So yeah, for all of those UK people, yeah, the price is not cheap. So there you go, 15 things you should consider before buying this new iPad. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think about this new iPad? What do you guys think about buying it? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it sucks? I think it sucks. I think it's obviously cheap, but this is basically an iPad Air 1, with an Apple A9 chip, which again, the Apple A9 chip is a 2015 processor, so it's an old processor. Buying an iPad now with a 2015 processor, or you could even call this a 2014-2015 processor because it's weaker than the Apple A9X, and it's also going to be weaker, most likely, than the regular Apple A9 because it's driving a much higher resolution display. So the performance is going to be okay. However, in a year or in 2 years, the operating system, the new version of iOS, will significantly slow down this iPad. So definitely keep that in mind if you really want to get a new iPad right now. Feel free to check out my previous video that I also did today on the red iPhone 7 and on pretty much every single update that we had today in that silent Apple Store update. Also feel free to subscribe if you have enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more things you need to know before buying videos like this one. And also don't forget to enable notifications on my channel on both desktop and mobile. On mobile by simply click on the bell icon next to my channel so that you're notified as soon as I upload a brand new epic video. Let me know in the comments if you're epic enough to make it until the end of this video. And this has been pretty much it for this video. Feel free to give it a like if you have enjoyed it to let me know. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.